will you discuss related party strategies to get an additional 180-day period to extend the time frame on an arm length transaction?
All right, I'll go down any rabbit hole anytime. They threw down the gauntlet. Let's do it.
This is from Clint. Good one, Clint.
Thanks, Clint.
Whoever Clint is.
Clint is in Dallas, I believe, and he is a player in the national commercial market. So thank you, Clint. All right, so let's say that you do an exchange. And you're in the midst of your 180-day period. You're in the midst of your 45-day period, and you're pessimistic about your ability to complete an exchange. But you have a related party that owns appreciated real estate that would be perfect. So, ma'am, let's say that your mother owns an apartment complex. And you say to your mom, you know, I'm not finding anything I like. And I'd rather buy the devil I know than the devil I don't know. So, mom, related party mom, would you consider selling your property to me so that I can complete my exchange? And normally the related party rules would maybe be more present and front and center in your mind. But there's a private letter ruling that says if mom, your related party seller, also does a 1031 exchange, and she ultimately buys her replacement property from an unrelated person, her actions in effect cleanse your related party transaction, because at the end of this chain or sequence of events, the actual ending seller is an unrelated party. There's no scheme here to avoid the imposition of the tax. Okay, so you are young, vibrant, and able to take on the management responsibilities of this apartment building. And mom is older and wants to travel to Europe and not have to worry about the boiler going out on her apartment complex. And she's tired of the management. So she's happy to sell you the apartment building. What would be a great management-free replacement option that your mom could consider that she would be buying from an unrelated third party? Anybody? Bueller? In the back, my friend Tom Rashad of Morgan Stanley says a DST would be a great option to consider for mom, because the DST sponsor is unrelated, is providing a passive, management-free product to mother that is designed for wealth preservation and tax efficiency and to derive a steady, predictable stream of income so that mother can rely on it in her retirement years. So that's a related party combo. First, you get 180 days on your exchange, and then mom gets up to 180 days on her exchange. And if you get enough related parties involved, you could just continue to defer until ultimately the last one buys from an unrelated party. So there's a way to chain these together, and that's what Clint is asking about in his online question. That's a great question, Clint. Thank you. Let's say that you own a retail business in Minneapolis, and the neighborhood has changed around you, and the local municipal regulations have changed around you. Parking has changed, traffic patterns have changed, and the building is too small and you're constrained in it, and the location isn't really right for you anymore. But you've got a lot of appreciation in that Minneapolis location. Maybe you'd be better off repositioning your property into an outer-lying suburb where you're more welcomed by the local government. The zoning and municipal regulations are easier. In a build-to-suit exchange, you sell the relinquished property, place the money with the intermediary, and then the intermediary, acting through an exchange accommodation title holder, purchases the replacement land. And you are not only identifying the replacement land, the legal description, you're also identifying the real property improvements to be produced. The intermediary insulates you from receiving that land prematurely. And then during the remainder of your 180 days, you arrange for the construction of real property improvements to build your new facility, your expansive, specifically built to your needs location that will maximize your use, increasing productivity, increasing employee happiness. So building out a new facility in the outerlying burbs might be the way for you to take your business to the next level, but you don't want to get slapped on the wrist with taxes in the midst of that transition. How long is the exchange period in a forward exchange? 180 days. Is 180 days enough time? You need to receive a replacement property of equal or greater value and equal or greater equity. If you sell your Minneapolis location for $1 million and the new land in the suburbs cost $500,000, then your bogey for constructing improvements is $500K. Does he have to have his new location completely finished and done? No. He has to have it done enough so that the land and buildings are worth $1 million or more. So he's continuing his investment into an equivalent valued property and equivalent equity. So we really just need to spin $500,000 into existing real property improvements. Is a 2x4 that's lying on the job site loose real estate? No. Is the plumber that's not going to do the work until next month, is the invoice for the plumber real estate for work that will be done in the future? Is that real estate? No. Prepaid materials, prepaid contractors don't count. You have to do a like-kind exchange, which means you need to build enough real property improvements to exist as real estate. How do you prove that? The title company may be dispersing for your mortgage lender, and they keep very accurate records. Your general contractor could provide a written statement that on this day they had completed $500,000 of construction improvements. And you might want to go out there with your video phone, your drone, whatever you want, and take pictures of the site to show the skeleton of the building is up, the framing, foundation, and all that's existing as real estate. Because it's on your shoulders to prove that you received real estate of equivalent value and equity. And you need to receive the property that you identified, substantially the same property that you identified. Yes, sir. Andy asked the question, are furniture and fixtures in the replacement property going to qualify? Remember, the IRS has now restricted 1031s to real estate. Is a dining room table real estate? Is a chair real estate? Is a 4K digital flat screen television real estate? No. I would say no. But built-in fixtures, a water heater is a good example, is plumbed in. A dishwasher is affixed and permanently plumbed in. Those are things that were personal property until they got incorporated permanently into the structure. So some things may count because they're immobile, they're permanently affixed and attached, and other things that are chattel, non-real estate, movable items of tangible personal property like a table will not count. All right, so Andy, you've completed your 1031 exchange. It's gorgeous. And your accountant pats you on the back for being so great at deferring gains in constructing your new improvements. But your employees are grumbling that they have nowhere to sit down and there's no table in the break room. What are Andy's options post-exchange? You could go to your friends at U.S. Bank and say, "Banker, I own this property. It's rich with equity, but I have no money to pay for the furnishings for the chairs and tables in the break room. I'd like to do a post-exchange refinance. I'd like to borrow money against my equity. I'm coming to you after the exchange is done, and this is a separate and distinct transaction from my purchase closing. But I'd like to borrow some money against my replacement property so I can furnish the thing." So can you have your cake and eat it too? Yes. But you may have to delay your gratification and go back to your bank later in a subsequent transaction unrelated to your purchase financing. The time to have this discussion is not before you've bought the property. The time to have this discussion is after you've bought the property in a separate sort of thinking. I need some money for furnishings. You can still get to the same result, because when you borrow money against your replacement property, that's not gross income. You have a corresponding obligation to repay that loan so you can get your hands on that equity. A very successful strategy that many real estate rich investors use is they put a line of credit, a credit facility on all of their rental properties after they acquire them in a separate subsequent transaction. And Matt's looking at me because you know that there could be an unforeseen vacancy. There could be an unforeseen holdover tenant that refuses to pay you. You could have a pandemic occur and not receive any income for months at a time. You could have an unforeseen repair expense. You may want to have a line of credit for business purposes available to you so you can tap into your equity, because many real estate investors have stretched themselves real thin. They are real estate rich and cash poor. All right. I want to talk to you about time because you need to keep me online here. You tell me when to stop. I want to stop when you want to stop. I get this question all the time. People want to build improvements on land they already own. This is a very important strategy to know, because what if you can't find replacement property, but you have underutilized raw land? What if you own an office building that has a huge surface parking lot behind your office building right outside of downtown Minneapolis? That surface parking lot is being underutilized. It's a beautiful target to do a build to suit on. The problem is you already own it. There's a couple of cases that stand for the proposition that you can't build on land that you already own. The IRS took the position that that's not an exchange because you're not receiving anything new. You already owned the dirt. They think of it the same as paying down a mortgage on a property that you already own. In their minds, you're not receiving anything new. You're just enhancing your financial position on that which you already have. So that was the position of the IRS for decades. And then a private letter ruling comes out. It's showing on the board here. And what they did in this private letter ruling is they created a new estate. They created a leasehold estate, like a three-dimensional chess player is playing chess on a number of different fields or layers. They created a new layer, a new estate, the leasehold estate. The leasehold estate is owned by the tenant. The tenant can construct improvements on this land, this leasehold estate, and that could be the replacement property. So there are ways to do it. The problem is that the IRS changed RevProc 2037, the reverse exchange safe harbor that's used in this paradigm. And they said you can't park a property that's been previously owned by the same taxpayer if the taxpayers owned it in the last 180 days. So if you want to be in the safe harbor, and Paul owns the relinquished property, and Paul owns the replacement land, I would say the first step in your strategic planning is to move the replacement raw land into a different entity so it's not so matchy-matchy, apples to apples, Paul to Paul. Paul, you're going to put the replacement land into a partnership that files a 1065 tax return. Paul and Matt Thompson are going to be partners in that deal. You're going to own 99% of it. Matt's going to own 1%, non-voting interest. You're bringing them in so that it has dissimilar ownership, not completely matchy-matchy. Now you let it sit. They call that the baking. You want to season it for a period of time. How long does he want to wait? 180 days. Because the RevProc says we can't do a parking arrangement on a property that's been owned by the same taxpayer in the preceding 180 days. So we need to chill out after you put the replacement property into this other entity. We wait. Then we commence the leasehold estate. That's the safe way to do it. Now, we can do non-safe harbor construction exchanges on land that you already own if you don't have time to bake it, to season it in a separate entity. But then you lose perhaps a lot of the clarity and certainty of the safe harbor. But people love to build improvements on land they already own. It's kind of like buying the devil you know rather than the devil you don't know. I've mentioned the estate of Bartel, and I've mentioned that we have both non-safe harbor and safe harbor reverse exchange modalities. I would say that 99% of the reverse exchanges that we see are done within the safe harbor. But there's still a fair number of reverse exchanges that are going to be done outside of the safe harbor, typically because you're constructing improvements of greater value. Greater value then can be constructed in 180 days. We see a lot of related party transactions. The related party transactions were designed to stop abuses that were happening. If you owned two subsidiaries, one subsidiary has a $40 million property that was bought 30 years ago and has low basis, and that's the one you want to sell. That's owned in entity A. And recently, you bought another $40 million property in California in entity B. Paul, you could just do an intercompany transfer, a swap between these two wholly owned subsidiaries and move the basis. The new basis from your new acquisition would move to the old property. And then when you sell the old property, now you have little or no gain. That was called basis shifting. They wanted to stop that. So they created these rules that basically say when you do a related party transaction, you and your related party cannot change properties for 2 years. You're locked in. Can't transfer for 2 years. That's not a big deal. There also cannot be an intent to avoid the imposition of the tax. Well, let me ask you, I'm going to drill into your brain. What's the difference between legitimately wanting to defer tax and illegitimately trying to avoid the imposition of the tax? Tell me the difference, Paul. You can't. It's indistinguishable. So then they ask, all right, if you're going to do a related party transaction, please provide a written narrative on the Form 8824 of why your related party transaction is okay and isn't part of a scheme to trick the IRS, to abuse the rules. Where we see this used successfully is in farming. If Paul wants to buy a farm that's in close proximity to his home farm because of synergistic reasons, like it costs less gasoline to drive his tractor and his combine to this next neighboring farm than it does to cost to buy a farm on the other end of the county. It's synergistically more efficient to own closer in farms. Well, who is likely to own the closer in farms to your home farm? Your brother, your mother. Related parties are probably the owners of the other, or your siblings may have inherited the other parcels. So we see this a lot with related party farm transactions. We say to the accountant on the 8824, specify the synergistic reasons why he wants to own the closer in properties, but also lay it on thick with the emotional. The adjacent property has been in his family for over 100 years as part of a family tradition of farming. He wants to keep that parcel in the family as part of their tradition of farming. So there's also emotional appeals and business appeals that can be played. With you buying the apartment building from your mother, you can talk about how you know and trust the seller isn't trying to pull the wool over your eyes and all of the tenants are about to expire and leave in the middle of the night. And the boiler is not in disrepair. It's actually been repaired and maintained adequately. So there's arguments to be made. Buying from a related party is safer than buying from a stranger that might be trying to snooker you.